And now I'm going to welcome you again, and I'm going to do a little bit of the formal introduction, and then we'll let Daniella introduce herself the rest of the way. So Daniella HarPaz Mechnikov taught Yiddish as a lecturer at the University of Michigan and at Brandeis University. Growing up in a Hebrew-speaking home, Daniella studied Yiddish at the University of Michigan and at the Uriel Weinreich Yiddish program run by YIVO. She has a wide variety of experiences with Yiddish in terms of translations, subtitles in English of films. She has a real specialty with Yiddish music as well, and she's performed throughout Metro Detroit and the Boston area, this Yiddish music, including singing at the grand opening of the New England Holocaust Memorial. I'm going to let her do more of that introduction in a moment, but we'll leave it there. And thank you very much for coming. You know, Daniella will have an opportunity a little bit later on for questions. For now, it might be best to put questions in the chat, either directly to me or to just hang on to them until we get to some Q&A. Thank you, Daniella, for being our teacher tonight.
Hi, guys. It's a pleasure to be with you, or be with you as it is. So as Rabbi Rubenstein said, I've been speaking Yiddish and started to study Yiddish for about 35 years. It's not a language that I grew up speaking at home. I took it really as kind of a blow-off class, thinking it might be fun in college. And it was one of those rare experiences where a group has like a magical chemistry, and that's what happened with this particular class, and all of us stayed together for 2 years, taking class after class, and then some of us continued, some didn't, but that's really what sparked what I thought sparked my interest in Yiddish and connected me first. At some point in that Yiddish class, I answered a question that the teacher posed with a verb structure that she had not taught yet. She asked a question and I answered in the pluperfect past, if you'd like to know what it was called, which we could talk about at a different time if you wanted. And she just stopped for a minute and said, how do you know how to answer in that case? I haven't taught you that yet. And I said, well, you must have. I didn't learn Yiddish anywhere else. You must have taught it to me. And she said, no, I'm quite sure that's like advanced grammar. We haven't done that yet. And I said, I don't know. I'm not sure. That's the weirdest thing that I have ever experienced. So that incident in my college class made me start to think about my connection to Yiddish, what Yiddish I knew, and I actually had a dream about my grandmother then speaking to me in Yiddish. So I realized that as a little girl, I'd spent a lot of time with my father's mother and her sister, and their common language was Yiddish. So while I didn't speak Yiddish, I heard a lot of it around them, and I must have just soaked up a lot as a sponge, and didn't really realize that I had more Yiddish than I thought when I went into the class. In addition to having studied German in high school and speaking Hebrew at home, there were elements of Yiddish grammar and expression that had soaked into me that I didn't realize. My mother also, Yiddish was her first language. She was born essentially in a DP camp and was 4 when she moved to this country. And in her home in New York, Yiddish was the language that was spoken almost exclusively during her childhood. So it was definitely a language for a quick secret between my parents, or my mother would speak to her mother on the phone in Yiddish sometimes. So I soaked up a little bit and then studied it in college and in New York City. I just sort of fell in love with it. It felt like a natural connection to me, and ended up teaching it at the University of Michigan for a couple of years, and then at Brandeis, as the rabbi said. And my love for Yiddish was really about the culture, the music, the literature. I wasn't really a historian. I learned to appreciate history when I got a little older. I was 24 when I went to Brandeis to teach. I was quite young to be in that position. It wasn't a super mature relationship with the subject. It just was kind of some spark in me that I couldn't identify what it was from. Anyway, the story that I brought to work on with you guys today is really the first short story that I read without it being verkitzert and verbessert, as they would say in Yiddish, abridged and improved upon, is the joke, for students. And I just loved it, and I've always loved it since, and learned a little bit about the author because I remembered that moment when this story kind of ignited something in me about Yiddish literature and what it could show about a certain moment in culture. So the story I brought today is called Mein erster Deposit, my first deposit, and it's written by Moyshe Nadir. That is a pseudonym for Yitzchak Reis, or later he called himself Isaac Reis when he moved to this country. He was born in Eastern Galicia, then Austria-Hungary, and moved here when he was 13 or 15, I think, to New York. And he wrote under a variety of pseudonyms. So Nadir in Yiddish, Nadir means here, have some, take some, have a piece. But it also cynically can mean take a piece and choke on it. So it was a kind of an interesting choice for him in a pseudonym. He wrote under many pseudonyms, but this is the one that he stuck with for years. Once he picked it, it kind of became the main nom de plume that he used when he published. So the idea that even in his name, there was this kind of a commentary amused me right from the start. The idea that he's saying, here, have something, have some Yiddish, have some stories, have my observations, but there was also a little bit of a this in his name, like a challenge in his name. It was an invitation, but it was also a push. And it's not a name that speaks of a kind of the Yiddish that I thought I was going to encounter when I studied Yiddish. It's not just a sweet, old shtetl, kind-hearted person who makes some jokes. It was something that was making a statement right from the beginning. And one of the things that I love about the Yiddish that I've studied and my relationship with Yiddish literature is that exact idea. There's this, and I'm sure it's partly influenced by my teachers, my wonderful teacher, Anita Norrit, who taught me at the University of Michigan, and my amazing teachers at YIVO. Dr. Mordechai Schechter was they're second to none as a teacher of Yiddish language. Avram Novichstom from Hebrew University of Jerusalem came to teach there, and really I was privileged to study with some of the greats. It worked out excellent for me, but each one of them tried to show me a kind of Yiddish that was not the Yiddish in a box that people assume there is. I can't tell you how many times someone finds out that I speak Yiddish and they tell me about how quaint it is or how it's the most hilarious language. And then I'll say, oh, do you speak Yiddish? And they say, no. I think I had that same inclination before I started to study it. It's kind of funny, like what other language would you say to someone, oh, that's such a cute language. And then someone says, do you speak it? No. Well, how do you know it's a cute language? There's a feeling about it, a kind of nostalgia, a love, and it's not bad. There's truth to some of it, but I liked the part of Yiddish that was not cute. I liked sexy Yiddish, because there was sexy Yiddish. For example, I found it amazing that there's a dictionary about botany in Yiddish. I love that. People don't think about it, but people study botany in Yiddish. There are chemistry textbooks in Yiddish. There's erotica in Yiddish. In fact, Moyshe Nadir, this guy we're going to touch upon tonight, he was very well known for a really erotic poem he wrote called the Something Rose. I'm blanking on the name of it, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff in Yiddish that's not cute or pat, and it's not Fiddler on the Roof. And so this is Yiddish in America. I picked a story that is sort of that kind of, that example that I'm talking about. It's like a little bit of a different kind of Yiddish. So I'm going to show you a picture of Moyshe Nadir so you can see what he looked like. And I'm not like the most outstanding Zoom sharer, so bear with me, please. There we go. That's Moyshe Nadir. So this is in the 1920s, probably late 20s, maybe early 30s. It was probably in his, younger, like 30s, I would guess, there. The story that I'm reading, I printed for myself. I downloaded the PDF from the National Yiddish Book Center. So I wanted to show you, I will share after tonight, I'll send the rabbi the PDF of the story in Yiddish because it's copyright free because it's so old. It's published in 1919, and also a link to where I downloaded it. So the National Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, I won't go into the tangent, the long story of what it is, but it's a pretty remarkable place. And they have an online digital library of a huge Yiddish collection that's available with an online reader. You don't even need any software, and you can just find the books. They also have audio books, and they have lectures and presentations that are all available. So I'll send that link to the rabbi. I just wanted to show you what the opening pages of the book looks like when they digitize a book, because it's kind of interesting. So the book is called Afkelechter, kind of like, I guess I would say, for laughs. And it talks about the preservation of the book. And then it talks about who funded the book. And then it shows you the cover page in Yiddish, Afkelechter, or Oifkelechter, in a different Yiddish dialect. Moyshe Nadir is his name. Ersh Buch, it's from a collection of books, is the first one. And then it shows down here 1919 that was published in New York. The publishing house was called theyre. And there you go. That's what I want to show you. This is what it looks like in the Yiddish. I'm going to stop my screen sharing. And what I decided to do for today, when Rabbi Rubinstein and I talked about what to do, I decided that I wasn't really going to teach a long class in Zoom. I was going to read you guys a story. I love short stories, and I think there's something about experiencing a language. Now, I know you don't all speak Yiddish, or I'm assuming you don't all speak Yiddish fluently, so I'm going to read it in such a way that I translate as I go, and it should be accessible to everybody. I've done this before. It's kind of a in between a story reading class and a performance, somewhere in the middle of it all. I am not going to look at the chat while I do this. So Rabbi, if you need me, wave at me. It's distracting to me to look at the chat at the same time. And if anyone else needs me, just wait till I'm done or send a chat to the rabbi, please. So here we go, unless there's anything else anyone needs right off the bat. Mein erster deposit, my first deposit. Ich weiß nicht, wie soll das ist geschehen. I have no idea how it happened. Wie soll sie mir gar eingefallen, als Gedank zu nehmen meine blutige Gelder und sie an eine Bank. How I had the crazy idea to take my hard-earned money and entrust them to a bank. Aber geschehen. But it happened. Moitze Chaneke von heintigen Jahr habe ich genommen meine schwer verhorvete Gelder, meine $20. At the end of Hanukkah this year, I took my hard-earned money, my $20, und sie weggetrogen in Banken rein. And I took them to the bank. Und anstatt Geld, instead of money, lebendig Geld, was man kann damit kaufen, was man will. Living money, with which one can buy whatever one wants. Habe ich gekriegt etwas green Gichle, so aufgelegt in a Geld Converto. I got some kind of a little green booklet stuffed in a yellow envelope. Und das alles. That's all. Als ich hab das gesehen, ist mir eingefallenes Herz. When I saw it, my heart fell. Und ich hab schon Charotte gehabt auf dem ganzen Indien. And I regretted the entire thing. Erstens ist mir nicht gefallen geworden das Bucherl, was steht beim Fenster. First of all, I did not like the young guy by the window. Und nimmt zu es Geld, the guy who took my money. A young Bucherl, a young boy. Nicht kein verheiratet. Was tue ich ihm, als nimmt zu das Geld und läuft? What am I supposed to do if he takes my money and runs? Und zweitens, and secondly, ist mir nicht gefallen, wie so hat mich behandelt. I really didn't like how he interacted with me. Zunehmen das Geld, a chaf getan etwas a Bichele, a reingeschrieben dort, was nicht ist, der langt mit a Knack auf ein Fenster und a Sing getan. Next! He grabbed my money, handed me some sort of a booklet, scribbled something in there, knocked on the window, and sang, next! Azoi kich, wie ich hab gekrogen es Bichele, hab ich a kuketon inwendig. Just as soon as I got the booklet, I looked inside. Und es ist mir verkillt geworden, wo ich hab gehad a Troppenblut. My blood ran cold. Was ist das für ein Geschrift? What kind of writing is this? Und wie soll wird es können überlehnen? How is he going to be able to read it? Und von wann weiß als es macht 20? How does he know that it's $20? Hab ich getracht, es gefällt mir nicht der ganze Reisig. I thought to myself, something about this entire business is not good. Und ich bin zugelaufen zum Fenster, so I ran back to the window. Weggesteckt dem Jiden, was ist gestanden in line, shoved aside the man who was standing in the line, und reingeschrien zu dem Bucherl dort in ein wenig, hey! And I yelled to the young boy who was standing in there. I yelled to him, hey! Hab ich ihm reingeschrien, I yelled to him, ich hab euch auch erst weggegeben $20. I just gave you $20. Was wollt ihr? What do you want? Macht zu mir das Kassiererl und verschnitzt sich a Bleifeder. Says the cashier to me as he sharpens a pencil. Ich will, als ihr soll's nicht sein, als es spunnen. What I want is for you to not be so insolent, sag ich, said I. Als nicht habst du a Flem über die Piskis, als der gute Jahr wird dir zu nehmen. You better watch the way you talk or it's going to be a nightmare for you. Macht zu mir, he says to me, Mister, was wollt ihr? Mister, what do you want? Ich hab euch gegeben a Bichel. That's all. I gave you a booklet. That's all. It's enough, sag ich. It's enough, I say. Ich will mit dir mehr nicht reden. Du Blutsauger, sag ich, was du bist. It's enough, I said. I don't want to talk to you anymore, you bloodsucker. I say, was du bist that you are. Ich seh schon, I see, sag ich, I say, als ich bin da reingefallen in die richtige Hand. I can see that I have fallen in just the right kind of hands. Gib mir zurück, sag ich, das Geld. Und lass mir, sag ich, sein Ausmachtonim. Give me back, I say, my money. Und let us, I say, get a divorce. Macht zu mir. He says to me, it's impossible. Sag ich, I say, ich will dir bald geben, it's impossible. I'll give you it's impossible. As der Gute hier wird dir zunehmen, you're gonna regret this. Schwindler, sag ich. Swindler, I say. Was du bist. Mit mir, sag ich, wirst nicht machen a solche Stück. Swindler, I say that you are. With me, I said, you can't do this kind of a thing. Gib her die Gelder, give me my money, sag ich. Eider, sag ich ruf Polizistke, und eider, sag ich schrei Gewalt. Give me back, I say. Before I said, I'm gonna call the police. And before said I scream Gewalt. Gewalt! So schrei ich sich auf den Kohl. I yelled out loud, Gewalt! Der Herd, als ich schrei Gewalt, when he heard that I was screaming Gewalt, is schon geworden a bissel weicher. He got a little softer with me. Der Bucher, the young man. und mir genommen geben zu verstehen, als jetzt kann mir nicht zurückgeben das Geld. He explained to me that now he cannot return the money to me, as ich muss warten 2 Wochen. I have to wait for 2 weeks. Sa rule azat. There's such a rule. Zog ich, said I, oi bazoi, to lenge mir über was ihr hat reingeschrieben in Michele. Then read over to me, read what you wrote in the booklet. Lo mir sehen, zog ich, zu ihr weißt, was ihr hat dort reingeschrieben. Let me see, said I, if you know actually what is written there. Epis, sag ich, hat es mir gemacht zu schnell. There's something about it, said I. I think you did it a little too quickly. Es gläubt sich mir nicht. I cannot believe, sag ich, said I. As man soll as so gich können verschreiben as so viel Geld. How could one write so much money down so quickly? Nehmt bei mir zu Spiegele und lehnt über. He takes the booklet from me and he reads, $20. $20. Sag ich, said I. All right. Gedenkje, es ist $20. Und sollen die Jiden, sag ich, stehen neben Fensterl sein Edis. All right, remember, it's $20. And let all the people, said I, that are standing by the window be a witness. Jiden, sag ich, seid Edis, as ich hab da in Bank 2 knackedicke Zennerlich. People, I said, bear witness that I have here in the bank 2 crispy 10s. Und ich gehe heim mit Michele. And I go home with the booklet. Mele versteht sich, als von Schlafen ist schon gewesen abgeregt. Of course, you can imagine that from sleeping. Forget about it. A ganze Nacht hat sich mir geholnt, als Räuber seine befallen die Bank und man hat ausgeräubt wo a penny. I dreamt all night that robbers attacked the bank and stole every penny. Etliche Mal durch der Nacht habe ich sich aufgeweckt. A few times through the night, I awoke und geschrien Gewalt and shouted Gewalt. Und as sie es geworden Tag, when day came, habe ich die erste Sache gehabt und weggelaufen zu der Bank. The first thing I did was hop on the train and go to the bank. Then ganz. It was standing. Nicht ausgeräumt, not robbed. A Stein ist mir herab von Herzen. A stone was lifted from my heart. No, also ich bin also gestanden bei der Bank und betrachte das Fenster. And as I was standing, though, contemplating the bank, looking at the windows, ist mir eingefallen, als die Gratis seien zu schwach und als man darf hoffen neue Gratis. It occurred to me that the grates on the windows did not look secure. They were too weak, and really, they needed to install new window grates. Bin ich schon also gestanden mit dem Lunchkessel in Hand und gewartet, bis der Präsident von Bank wird ankommen. I stood there with my lunchbox and waited till the president of the bank was to arrive. As der Präsident ist angekommen, when he arrived, habe ich ihm vernommen an der Seite und ihm gesagt. I took him aside and said to him, as muss haben neue Gratis für der Bank und nach meiner Meinung, sag ich, ist die ganze Gebete a schwache und man darf sie überbauen. I told him that he needed new grates on his windows. And in my opinion, I said, the entire building is actually kind of weak and it should be reconstructed, rebuilt. Man darf sehen, sag ich, als die ganze Gebete soll sein von Same Mermelstein, weil Mermelstein, sag ich, is hart. Really, I believe the entire building should be built of marble, I said, because marble, said I, is hard. Macht zu mir, he said to me, all right. Ich dank euch für der Eitze. I appreciate your suggestion. Sag ich, said I, gedenk Leman Hashem, remember in God's name, an neue Gebete von Mermelstein, a new building of marble. Und neue gratis, and new grates. Und sie soll sein, sag ich, gut bewohnt. Ich bin extra, sag ich, gekommen zu laufen von Bronzeville. It should be well protected, said I. Remember, I came extra, I said, all the way from Bronzeville. Weil sie hat sich mir, sag ich, gecholemt, als man hat uns begangen. Because I dreamt, said I, that we were robbed. Und ich laufe weg zu der Arbeit. And I ran off to work. Per Nacht, in the evening, as ich darf heimfahren, on my way home, dachte ich, I thought to myself, ich will vorbeigehen die Bank, sehen, was sie hört sich. I'll just pass by the bank and see what's going on. Man kann keinmal nicht wissen, dachte ich, wie so eine Sache macht sich. You never know, I thought to myself, how something's going, what's going on with something. Samerike. Tracht ich komme so zu der Bank. I come to the bank und ich gebe a Krug. Sehe ich etwas Ayid, fliegt raus von Bank und hebt an Liffen. Of course, I'm watching the bank, and just as I arrive, I see a man running out of the bank and just starts running, just flies out of the bank. Hoi bichon schreien Gewalt. I start to shout Gewalt. And ich läufe ihm noch. I chase after him. So long bis wann der policeman hat ihm abgestellt, until a police officer stopped him. Und was meint ihr, hat sich herausgewiesen? And what do you think it turned out to be? Es hat sich herausgewiesen, als der Ried ist angestellt in Bank und ist gelaufen, hab makar, weil das Weib geht ihm zu Kind mit der Mädel. It turned out that he was in the bank and he was running to catch a train because his wife is delivering a baby girl. Habe ich mich a couple verschämt und heimgefahren. I was a little embarrassed and I went home. Aber schlafen habe ich wieder nicht gekannt. But once again, I was not able to sleep. A ganze Nacht hat sich mir alles ausgedacht, als das Kassierer, was hat mir gegeben das Bücherle, halt in der Hand ein Säckel mit Geld und läuft. A whole night I kept thinking about the cashier, the one who gave me that booklet. And I imagined him holding in his hand a sack of money and running. Und ich noch ihm, of course, I was in chase. Und ich habe wieder etliche Mal geschrien Gewalt von Schlafen. Of course, a few times again, I screamed Gewalt in my sleep. And I waved about with my hands, geworfen mit die Hand, und schier der hargete baby. Almost killed the baby. Zu morgens, in the morning, ganz früh, bin ich weg zu a Landsmann. Very early the next morning, I went to visit a Landsmann, a man from my hometown in Europe, was wohnt grad gegen der Bank. He lived just across the street from the bank. Und ich habe ihm zugesagt, 30% von dem Verlust, aber soll halten an euch auf der Bank. I promised him 30% of my savings if he would just keep an eye on the bank. Und soll sie watchen and watch it. Watch, habe ich ihm gebeten. Watch, I begged of him. Sit und watch. Los nicht darauf, sag ich, an euch von der Bank. Don't take an eye off the bank. Und sag ich, wie Gott wird mir helfen und die 2 Wochen wollen beschollen rüber. And just as soon as God helps me, and these 2 weeks have passed, ich gleich heraus, sag ich, die $20 und lassen sich, sag ich, und ziehen den alle Bank. As soon as it happens, I'm going to grab my $20, I say, and let all banks burn. Mehr, sag ich, tritt ich dort nicht arriba wie Schwell. I am never, said I, gonna cross the threshold of a bank again. Derweil, meanwhile, gehen weg noch 2 Tage. 2 more days pass. Lehen ich in die papers, I read in the papers, as man hat begann mit a bank, ergens in die Bronx. Some bank was burgled in the Bronx. Läuf ich weg zum Präsident von mein Bank und sag ihm, I run to my president from my bank and I tell him, this is bitter. Macht zu mir, Was ist der Mehr? He asks me, what's the problem? Sag ich, I say, meganvit. People are stealing. Sagt he says, bei mir wird man nicht ganvenen. Mein Bank is bewahrend. No one's going to steal from me. My bank is secure, he said. Sag ich, say I, nu, und was tut lemoshel, as kassierer habt zu Geld und it läuft? What are you going to do if your cashier grabs the money and runs? Sagt he says, Mister, weiß nicht, was redt. You don't know what you're talking about. Sag ich, said I, nu, mele weiß nicht, was ich red. I don't know what I'm talking about. Es ist mir nicht gelegen, aber neue gratis hat gemacht. I don't know anything, huh? But have you installed new grates? Sagt name. He says no. Sag ich nu, und die Gebäude hat übergebaut? Sie euch nicht. Have you rebuilt already or no? No. Macht please. Hört auf bothering. Stop bothering. Sag ich, ob ihr hat nicht gemacht, kein neuer gratis. Und die Gebäude hat euch nicht übergebaut. Und das schöne Kassierer-Eiers hat nicht abgeschafft. Tu, gib mir her, sag ich, die Gelder. Gib mir her, sag ich, die Gelder. If you haven't installed new grates, said I, and if you haven't rebuilt in marble, and if your cashier is still employed, then don't give me any excuses. Just give me back, said I, my money. Sagt he said, ihr müsst warten bis wann es wird sein volle 2 Wochen. You have to wait a full 2 weeks. Sag ich, I say, all right. Ich will warten, I'll wait. Aber weißt ihr, wo ich will warten? But you know where I'm gonna wait? Otto, in draußen vor der Bank will ich warten. Right here, outside in front of your bank, I'm gonna wait. Ihr wird bei mir, sag ich, kein Dierd und kein Satisfaction, sag ich, wird ihr bei mir nicht ausführen. You are not going to get me to move from this earth, and you are not going to get any satisfaction out of me, said I. Ich soll afilu wissen, I will even know, as meine Kinder wollen bleiben ohne Taten, my children are going to be fatherless, weil ich mich nicht rühren von draußen, and I will not leave this spot outside. Bis wann ich will nicht haben zurück das Geld, until I get my money back. Ich will nicht überlassen, sag ich, die Bank auf Hefker. I will not leave the bank alone in Hefker. I, said I, will watchen und mein Landsmann, was wohnt da gegenüber, watchen. I'm going to watch, and my Landsmann, he's also going to watch. He lives right here. Set sich tun, sag ich, it's going to be dark for you. What does that mean, bin ich? That's the kind of guy I am. Ich will da stehen in Deutschen. I'm going to stand outside, sag ich. In die größte Frist. Und lass mir sehen, sag ich. Tut mir etwas. Do me something. I am going to stand outside, even in the coldest of weather, said I. And let's see, I said. Do anything to me. Do me something. Macht zu mir. He says to me, ihr sind ein moderner Mensch. You are a strange man. Kommt herab mit mir unten in Bank. Come downstairs with me in the bank. Will ich hasten, stolen. I will pay you very quickly, sagt Eire $20 for $20. Sag ich, no, sir. I said, no, sir. A selche monkey business gehen bei mir nicht in Weil, sag ich. Ihr wollt mir zurückgeben das Geld, welches darf ich nicht nehmen. And because you want to return the money to me, said I am not going to take it. You can't have that kind of monkey business stuff with me. Ihr kennt mich, sag ich, nicht zwingen dazu. I can't be manipulated, I said. Sagt he said, all right, nehmt nicht heraus das Geld, then don't take your money. Sag ich, never mind. I said, never mind. Nehmt nicht heraus das Geld, don't take out the money. As ich will ich herausnehmen. If I should want to take it out, then I will take it out. Zog ich. Sagt he says, please, geht raus und hört auf nudgen. Please, exit and stop bothering me. Zog ich, I said, all right, ich gehe. Aber ich will stehen in draußen. I'm going, but I am going to be standing outside. In die größte Frist will ich stehen in draußen und watchen meine Gelder. In the coldest weather, I'm going to be standing outside and watching my money. Und mein unschuldig Blut, sag ich, und das Blut von meiner unschuldigen Gesäumim wird fallen, sag ich, auf eure Cap. And my innocent bloods, I said, and the blood of my innocent orphans will fall, said I, on your head. Bandit, you bandit, sag ich, was ihr seid, that you are. Das electric chair, the electric chair, sag ich, I said, is für euch wenig. It's too little for you. Hitzel, murder, Gewalt, murder, Gewalt. Und ich nehm schreien mit alle Keuches, and I yelled with all my strength. Der Sof is gewesen. The end was, an men hat mir abgegeben die $20. I was given my $20. Und heimgehendig von Bank, on my way home from the bank, hat man sie bei mir herausgegangen von Keschene. I was pickpocketed. Und von demelt an, from then on, also endigt der Yid, was erzählt die dosige Geschichte. This is how the man who tells this story, von demelt an, from then on, hab ich sich gegeben a Schwur. I swore, als mein Fuß soll nicht herübertreten die Schwelle von a Bank. My foot would not cross the threshold of a bank. Siz regular banditen is dos. They're regular bandits. Keschnegenovim. Pickpockets. Pickpockets. Lassen sie sich anzünden. They should all burn. Der Sof.
Thank you all. So I see people clapping. That's excellent. So great. So Daniella, tell me what you'd like to do next. Should we, any people have some questions, or is there anything else about the story that you want to share? How would you like to go about this next?
So I guess I'll share a couple more things and then open it for questions or comments.
Right.
So it's interesting. It's a simple story. It's obviously not the most complicated story. It's a little slapsticky, but just because something's funny doesn't mean it isn't something full of observation and historical, I don't know the right word, like pearls, or beautiful language. Comedy is a real art, and Moyshe Nadir wrote a lot of comic pieces. He wrote some theater pieces, he wrote a lot of poetry, he wrote a lot of essays and observations about mankind. At different times in his life, he was either communist or anti-communist, depends on where you caught him in his trajectory. And I'm interested in general in when I studied language, both Hebrew and Yiddish, in how culture is seen through language. I studied, when I did comparative Hebrew and Yiddish literature, I was interested in how the same writer, for example, would write in Yiddish and be one kind of a person, and write in Hebrew and be another kind of a person. And it was really driven by the language. There's this, language is a tool, but it's really connected to our psychology and how we present ourselves, the use of masculine and feminine, the expressions, the use of other languages. So I really love in this story a few things. I love his use of English in the Yiddish. He says, that's all, it's impossible, all right, mister. There are all kinds of English words that are written in the Yiddish. I think those things are hard for us to hear as for people who learned Yiddish as English speakers first. The importance of those Englishisms in the Yiddish are hard for us to hear because that's almost what we have thought of as Yiddish for so long. The idea of accented English almost is Yiddish to English speakers. I know that may sound strange to anyone here who's a native Yiddish speaker, but I mean, people have come up to me and told me words that they know in Yiddish, but they're actually English words. So but if you imagine this being written for Yiddish speakers, the English words would stand out to them as English, right? It wasn't just something that was accented English, it was a foreign language in this Yiddish piece. So I like how the piece shows a new immigrant encountering something that was totally new to him. It was a contemporary institution for him that he had never dealt with before. When he talks about his Landsmann, you sort of get the feeling that he's from a small town somewhere in Eastern Europe, not from a big city. And this idea of a bank is a new institution. It's completely foreign to him. And he's soaked up enough modernity and enough America that he thinks it's something he should do, but not enough to really understand the implications. And I love all the moments in the story where you see those conflicts. What else? I don't know, I guess I could just leave it at that and see if anyone wants to say anything. I don't want to talk forever.
I'll just, add one thing. It's funny, one of my guiding lights for other things to read, both American Jewish literature, but especially Yiddish, is from Dara Horn, who, of course, she's mostly known as a novelist, but she actually is a PhD in Yiddish.
Right.
And I remember, I think when she came to Beth Am as scholar in residence, she was talking about the word olam, and how what happened was she was reading early Hebrew literature, but having a hard time with the word olam, which usually means the world, but in the context of these people writing in Hebrew, but for whom Yiddish was their primary language or first language. Mm-hmm. And when they said the olam, they were talking about all the people in the room, mm-hmm. as opposed to the world. And it just, when you're talking about English and Yiddish sort of back and forth a little bit, it reminded me a little bit of that story.
Yeah.
Too.
There's another example that's really just like that in the story. The narrator or the character, it's also like a character within a story because the end says, and the guy who told us the story. So it's narrated, but there's also a narrator inside the narrated story, which is a really cool technique that he uses to bring people in because nobody else has to feel it. I'm going to get to the word, but I also he's writing for a lot of new immigrants in 1919. So nobody feels like they have to feel like they're stupid because a lot of people would relate, but because he is a narrator telling the story about someone else, everyone can identify. Everyone gets to observe someone else having this experience and share in the humorous moments. But he says in Yiddish, there's a thing that a lot of English speakers aren't aware happens in Yiddish. He keeps calling people Yidden, Jews. Yidden, Yidden, Yidden. But in Yiddish, that's how you say people. Because what else would you call them? We're all the people who spoke Yiddish were Jewish. So he says, Yidden seid Edis, Jews, be witness. But I translated as people bear witness because he doesn't mean Jews. Of course they're Jews. They're just people. So that's one of those words where it's very specific to the language and it means something different in different contexts. It can mean just Jews, but in this context, it just means people.
So I have one more question, but why don't I, as I'm asking my question, why don't we, if people want to raise their hands, either literally or write in the chat, or you can raise your hands on Zoom, and we'll identify people and they can ask some questions. My question for you is, You know, you did mention in your introduction about the different accents or different, I don't know if it's accents or styles within Yiddish. How does a how did you, for example, get whatever accent that you got? Is it just based on your teacher? Is there just
So,
a standard for American when they're teaching Yiddish that it's a standard way?
uh, I think the word I would use is dialects. There are many dialects in Yiddish. They depend on where one. I mean, in Eastern Europe, before the Holocaust, before Yiddish became, you know, the Yiddish that it is now, when it was the language spoken by most Jews in the world, uh, where you were raised defined the dialect that you spoke in Yiddish. So there were Polish dialects and Lithuanian dialects, etc. The short answer to your story is that in Lithuania, in Vilna, was where the kind of, I would say, the heart of the Yiddish linguists had their institution and resided. It's where YIVO came from, which is the Yiddish Research Institute that's now in New York. And the great linguists of the Yiddish language were from there. And you know how they say, like in broadcasting, there's kind of a, at least historically, maybe it's changed now, but there's like a quote unquote perfect broadcaster English that has, it's like quote unquote accent free, and people say that it's something similar to a Midwestern English, etc. So, yeah, right. So the quote unquote, the Oxford Yiddish is sort of a version of Vilna Yiddish that was standardized by linguists. Now you have to be a little careful saying that now, because one of the big centers for Yiddish studies since the 80s is actually in Oxford, England, and they have their own Oxford Yiddish, which is different than the accent I'm talking about, although they also do teach that standardized Yiddish. So the Yiddish I learned is actually, to a native Polish Yiddish speaker, sounds a little stilted. In fact, my grandmother, my mother's mother, told me when I spoke Yiddish to her, she answered in her Yiddish, which was a Polish Yiddish, and told me that I sounded like I was born, I was the postman's child, which I thought was hilarious. She said, "Whose child are you, the mailman's?" Because I didn't speak her Yiddish. She's like, "I don't understand how my blood ended up sounding like you." Because really both sides of my family spoke Polish Yiddish. So the vowels are different. Most of the difference is in pronunciation of vowels. And there are some actual slight grammatical differences in some of the dialects, but they're minor.
Great,
So,
thank you. Looks like we have, yeah, so it looks like there's a question here from Nancy Goldberg. I don't know, in
yeah.
our age cohort, are there enough people you can converse with?
So no. I mean, my age cohort is now, I keep thinking of my age cohort as younger than it is, but ever since I started studying Yiddish, there's never been really a cohort of Yiddish speakers in my age group who are secular or who live in the non-Orthodox Jewish world. So there are small groups of hardcore Yiddishists who make an extreme effort to live and speak in Yiddish. There's a local group, the Shalom Aleichem Institute in Michigan. They recently had a presentation. I don't remember what it was exactly. It was sometime in the last 2 weeks. It kind of flew across my screen. And one of the people who came to do a presentation is a guy who translated Harry Potter into Yiddish. And I mean, it flew off the shelves when it was translated. I'm not sure exactly who the buyers were of the book, but however many thousands they printed were gone like within a day or two of it being published. So there are, I mean, these people who are very committed advocates for the Yiddish language make these kinds of efforts. Like my professor who, at the time, who published or was working on, I think I finished that dictionary of botany in Yiddish. And he also wrote a small dictionary of language for being amorous in Yiddish, because he thought people should know how to talk about sex in Yiddish. He was committed to that kind of stuff, to showing that, you know, Yiddish was a living language. In the ultra-Orthodox world, there are huge communities that speak only Yiddish as their main language. So they're not my cohorts just because of where I live my life, but it is a living language. Now, that Yiddish is also a different dialect, and I don't always understand it when I speak with people in that group. There's a lot of Lashon Kodesh, as they would say, a lot of Hebrew mixed in, and a lot of Yeshivish, like words out of the yeshiva world, or words out of the Orthodox life that don't mean anything to me. So I'm often saying "vos, vos, vos," and they usually look at me like I'm from Mars if I speak to them in Yiddish. I had a hilarious experience a few years ago with a group of teenaged Chabad girls who started to interact with me, and I asked them, I don't know what got into me, but I asked them some question about Yiddish and started to talk to them. They literally were like, could not believe that Yiddish was coming out of my mouth, because I didn't look like the picture of a Yiddish speaker. So, but there are pockets all over Europe of Yiddish speaking Orthodox, and in New York for sure, all around. There are also some people I studied with at YIVO back in the day who once in a while we banter a little bit. For that, I often miss my mother and my grandmother, because we would sometimes do it for fun.
Thank you. There was a question. I don't know if you know this, but are there any good online Yiddish language courses?
You know, I haven't looked into it in some time. Sheva Zucker, who was a well-known Yiddish teacher when I was studying, like in my 20s and 30s, she did some online Yiddish course for a while that was said to be pretty good. I think that I've seen both the Workman Circle out in New York and the and YIVO out in New York at different times offer things. So that's where I would look. I can look and then email you too for people who are interested. So I'll send the rabbi, in addition to the PDF and the National Yiddish Book Center link. Also, there's a couple of pieces by Moyshe Nadir, this author, that have been translated in the last 10, 15 years into English. So if this particular author is interesting, I'll send those titles, and also the names of some books of poetry that have English and Yiddish on opposite pages, some modern poetry that might be a little bit accessible to people. And I'll also send links to the Workman Circle and YIVO, so if you're interested, you can do a little more research.
I would just point out the younger contingent, actually, you know, Julia Pace, who's with us tonight, she just pointed out that her son Nadav, he studied Yiddish at the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, and he's I don't know what level he is right now, but he's dedicated. I know he is. So
yeah. There's
right,
another guy who used to teach here who studied there and then is now doing a lot of Yiddish theater in New York. Michal, blanking on his last name, but he was in the Yiddish reproduction of Fiddler on the Roof, and he was just in this very well reviewed other play where he plays this witch. What's his last name? Starts with an R. I'm supposed to know. Anyway, whatever. There are a lot of people who have gotten their start now at the National Yiddish Book Center. Great.
Well, I think we'll stop there, and big thank you. You know, there were a lot of comments that weren't questions that were just like thanks, and how great it was to just hear you read that and translate that, and how fun it was, and we are very appreciative. So thank you very much for doing that and for being with us. And
my pleasure.
Yeah. So
I just want to say, since we're not meeting in person at shul, Norman, I still have your book. I will send it to you. I really will. I just have to get your address. He lent me a book in Yiddish about Johannesburg, and then it was in a box, and I couldn't find it for a long time. I found it, and it's safe, and I will get it to you. So I just need to get your address. It will be my high holiday apology and return. It was a cool book.
Very good. Thank you to Daniella. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And hope you'll join us for other events in the future. Have a
It was
great
fun.
night.
Pleasure. Good night, everyone. Seid ihr gesund.